A really deep analysis of the ashab al-ukhdud. Many people today, after getting acquainted with the Musnad inscription Ya 1028, interpret it as a proof that Zu Nuwas was actually guilty of massacring many innocent Christians in Najran because of their creed. Nonetheless, the analysis of this deed needs to be done more carefully. If we judge it from the inscription alone, we might find many interesting details. First, the king first captured Zafar, central Yemen and Mocha before proceeding towards Najran, and as it is said, killed some Abyssinians there and also burnt a church in Zafar. The questions that emerged from that in front of someone who just discovered the Himyarite history are many. First of them might be, why are there Abyssinians in this towns? Why he mentions that he killed only them, and not Christians in general despite the church was burnt, and there might have been non-Abyssinian Christians on the way as probably the church was not open exclusively to the Aksamites. If we add other sources to this inscription, we can find an answer to this question. One inscription found in the Nejd tells of a war of Al-Mundhir, a northern neighbor of Zu Nuwas against some Madakarib Yafar, who was a king of Himyar just a year prior to the inscription of Ya 1028. Who was that Madakarib? The Book of the Himyarites, a Christian medieval source that mentions the story of Nadrani martyrs, mentions him under the name Madakarim, and tells that he was a king of Himyar before Yosef and that Hapsa, a Nadrani Christian noblewoman and a daughter of a preacher who by the way long ago burnt a synagogue, gave him a big sum of money. The letter of Simeon of Beit Arsham tells more about our Madakarib or Madakarim. There he is not named, but Yosef starts the letter with the king, whom the Abyssinians placed in our land has died in winter, so I started to rule the country asterisk. Who else could this king have been than Madakarib Yafar, one and the same? Thus, we learn that Madakarib, who Mundhir was fighting against and who was a king right before Yosef started the war, was a viceroy whom Aksamites placed in Himyar. Now this might explain why there were Abyssinians in Zafar and Central Mountains in Ya 1028. They either came to crash some rebellion or they were there during Madakarib's time. As Yosef grabbed the wheel and started his campaigns mentioned Ya 1028 right after the death of Madakarib, I doubt that there was any revolt in between those events, and also it was hard for the Aksamites to immediately arrive to central Yemen. Their inability to come and quickly chose a new viceroy in place was said to have been the reason of Yosef's take of power. So, the Abyssinians whom Yosef was fighting were likely the occupying forces that were present in the Yemen since a certain time ago. We do not know exactly since when, because the first decade of the 6th century constitutes the Dark Ages in the Yemeni history, thus there is a lack of any record about what was going on during it. Between that and 517 AD, there is an inscription from 515 AD that tells of a hunt the same Yazanids who supported Yosef in the campaigns mentioned in Ya 1028 performed after plundering a tribe. This took place in their homeland in northwestern Hadramaut. The last historically attested king of Yemen before Madakarib was Marthadilan, who governed in the 490s. It is hard to tell if he was an independent ruler or a viceroy who supported both Christianity and Judaism. Anyway, the conquest of Yemen took place somewhere between the era of his reign, or the early 500s, or the early 510s. Aksamites were Christians and were allies of the Romans. During that time, the Anastasian Wars were taking place, and in general, the Sassanids and the Romans never had a peaceful relationship with each other and tried to weaken each other. A common tactic was to attempt attaching the enemy's proxies to oneself, which Romans once attempted to do with the Lakhmids of Iraq, the Persian Arab allies. Lakhmids were not necessarily fond of the Persians, but they allied with them because of their geographical closeness, as it is bad to be a constant enemy of your neighbor who is stronger than you, he will take away your sovereignty. And because of their religion, the Roman Empire based upon zeal would be unlikely to accept in pagans or the Jews, and the kind of the Lakhmids was a devout pagan. Possibly that alliance was also based upon the enmity between Lakhmids and the Ghassanids. Himyar, being ruled by the Jews, also was closer to the Persian sphere, despite it was actually independent. The Himyarites had a very bad memory of the Romans, since the failed expedition of Aelius Gallus and long-time contact with the non-rabbinic Jews and the Jewish priests who ran from Palestine somewhere around the 1st century AD. Possibly that could have led to their choice of Judaism as the main religion later, as well as it being opposed to Christianity, that its archenemy Aksum chose. Nadran was an island in the sea, traditionally populated by Azdite and other non-Himyarite tribes as well as Bani Najjar. After whom it got named, it adopted Christianity, as it was traditionally at war with northern Yemenis. Yosef Asar's own kinsman, he was a Gaimanite as Nasam was a Gaiman subtribe, during the pre-Himyarite era had engaged in a war against Najjar tribe of Zerbin, an old name of Nadran which allied itself with Aksamites. This took place during the reign of Ilshara Yardhub and Yazil Bayin, before Marib and Sanar fell over to Himyarite conquerors. Yosef's tribe was thus Gaimanite, and Gaimanites were closely related to the Hashid. We can find Gaiman tribe among the tribes that took part in the Yazanid expedition in 515, assuming that they had formed a confederation or an agreement before Yosef's takeover, which explains their close ties since. Therefore he was not a Himyarite, and more so, could not chronologically have been a son of Abukarib Asad who was born a century before himself, and whose dynasty abrupted in the middle of the 5th century. Neither were the Yazanids Himyarite, they were Hadramis, and their retaining of the national feeling of connection with Hadramaut was a possible reason of the failure of Yosef's war of reconquest. We see that in Yar 1028 Yosef calls himself a king of all tribes. It was not an usual title of a Himyarite or a Sabaean king at any point of history who called themselves kings of Saba, Himyar, Hadramaut, Tordim, Tehama and Yamanat. Then it was a neologism. Perhaps Yosef did not want the old regional identities to keep on going, but found submitting the tribes to himself directly to be a better way of unifying the country. The theory that exists is that Yazanids have been uncontent with the idea of being subjected to Yosef and decided to get rid of him, and so they joined the Abyssinians and did it 7 years later. Afterwards, Samefar Ashwa converted to Christianity and became a viceroy of Himyar under Aksum. His tribe marked this occasion in an inscription found in their home in Abadan, Hadramaut.